The sprawling airbase at Kingsley Field stretched across the high desert landscape of southern Oregon like a concrete island in a sea of sagebrush. Home to the 173rd Fighter Wing of the Air National Guard, its primary mission was the training of F-15 Eagle pilots, some of the most elite aviators in the United States Air Force. For First Lieutenant Samantha Sam Mitchell, the base represented both opportunity and challenge. At 28, she was one of the newest instructor pilots in the program, with credentials that would impress anyone who bothered to read them. Air Force Academy graduate, top of her class in pilot training, 2 tour in the Middle East with multiple combat sorties. But her youth and gender often overshadowed her accomplishments in a community still dominated by men who had been flying since before she was born. On this crisp September morning, Sam stood on the flight line watching her students prepare for their training sorties. The rising sun glinted off the sleek gray fuselages of the F-15s, powerful twin-engine fighters capable of speeds exceeding Mach 2.5. She checked her watch, 0645, 15 minutes before the first takeoffs were scheduled. "Morning, Lieutenant," came a gravelly voice from behind her. Sam turned to see Master Sergeant Walter Collins approaching, his weathered face creased into a permanent squint from decades spent on flight lines across the world. At 62, Collins was the oldest maintenance technician still actively working on the base, a living repository of knowledge about fighter aircraft stretching back to the Vietnam era. "Morning, Sergeant Collins," she replied with polite professionalism. Though she respected his experience, their interactions had been somewhat strained since her arrival 3 months earlier. Collins represented an old guard that seemed inherently skeptical of young female officers in the cockpit. "Got some concerns about Eagle 3, Collins said, gesturing toward one of the F-15s being prepped for flight. "Pressure fluctuations in the hydraulic system during yesterday's post-flight checks. Might be nothing, but—" "The maintenance log was signed off," Sam interrupted, checking her tablet. "Captain Reynolds cleared it for flight status this morning." Collins frowned slightly. "Yes, ma'am, I saw that, but I was watching the gauges myself during ground tests. There's something intermittent that didn't show up in the standard diagnostics." Sam glanced at her schedule, feeling the pressure of the tight training timeline. Any delay would cascade throughout the day, affecting multiple student sorties. Captain Reynolds was the head of maintenance. If he had cleared the aircraft, questioning his judgment would create tension she didn't need. "I appreciate your diligence, Sergeant," she said diplomatically, "but we need to stick to the schedule unless there's a documented issue. Perhaps you could mention your concerns to Captain Reynolds for further evaluation after today's flights." Collins' expression remained neutral, but his eyes reflected disappointment. "Of course, Lieutenant, just doing my job." As he walked away, Sam felt a twinge of doubt. Collins had been maintaining fighter jets since before she was born, and his reputation for mechanical intuition was well known on the base. But she was the officer responsible for the training schedule, and making decisions based on unverifiable feelings rather than documented maintenance records wasn't how she had been trained to operate. The morning briefing proceeded as planned in the ready room, where Sam addressed the 4 student pilots assigned to her for the day's training exercise. "Today we'll be practicing basic fighter maneuvers with a focus on energy management in turning fights," she explained, standing before the whiteboard where she had diagrammed the key concepts. "Remember that the Eagle's strength is its thrust-to-weight ratio. Used properly, you should be able to maintain energy through sustained turns better than almost any adversary aircraft." The students, all male, all in their mid-20s, listened attentively. Though there had been some initial skepticism when she first arrived as their instructor, her obvious expertise and no-nonsense approach to training had earned their professional respect, if not always their personal warmth. "Lieutenant Parker, you'll be in Eagle 3, Lieutenant Washington in Eagle 7, Lieutenant Cruz in Eagle 5, and Lieutenant Barnes in Eagle 2. Any questions before we gear up?" Parker raised his hand. "Ma'am, what weather conditions can we expect at the training range?" "Clear skies, light winds from the northwest at 5 knots, unlimited visibility. Perfect day for flying." Sam smiled briefly. "Anything else? No, then let's get to it. We take off in 30 minutes. As the students departed to prepare for their flights, Major David Harrison, the squadron commander, entered the ready room. At 45, Harrison was a veteran pilot with over 3,000 hours in the F-15. His leadership style balanced military discipline with a pragmatic recognition of individual strengths. "Lieutenant Mitchell," he acknowledged with a nod. "All set for today's exercises." "Yes, sir. Students are prepped and aircraft are ready." Harrison studied her for a moment. "I just passed Sergeant Collins on my way in. He seemed concerned about one of the jets, Eagle 3, I believe." Sam maintained her professional composure. "He mentioned some hydraulic pressure fluctuations, sir, but the aircraft passed all standard diagnostics and was signed off by Captain Reynolds this morning." "Collins has good instincts," Harrison remarked, his tone neutral but his implication clear. "With respect, sir, we can't delay training flights based on instincts rather than documented issues. If we did, we'd never maintain our schedule." Harrison nodded slowly. "Schedule is important, Lieutenant, but so is safety. Your call on this one, but remember, those planes are 30 years old. Sometimes the people who have been with them the longest hear things the computers don't catch." "Understood, sir," Sam replied, although privately she felt caught between competing imperatives. Maintain the training schedule that was her primary responsibility, or delay based on the unverifiable concerns of a mechanic nearing retirement age. 30 minutes later, she stood on the flight line watching her students climb into their assigned aircraft. The morning sun had risen higher, and the temperature was climbing toward what promised to be a warm autumn day. Each student completed their pre-flight checks under the supervision of their assigned crew chiefs, the choreographed routine of fighter operations unfolding with practiced precision. Lieutenant Parker was the first to taxi out in Eagle 3, the aircraft Collins had expressed concerns about. Sam watched carefully as the F-15 moved toward the runway, looking for any sign of abnormality, but the powerful fighter appeared to be functioning perfectly. As she headed toward her own aircraft for a separate administrative flight scheduled later that morning, Sam passed Collins, who was observing the operations from near the maintenance hangar. Their eyes met briefly, and Sam gave him a reassuring nod as if to say, "See, everything's fine." Collins didn't return the gesture, his attention focused on Eagle 3 as it continued its taxi toward the runway. The old sergeant's posture conveyed a tension that made Sam pause momentarily before continuing to her aircraft. What she didn't know, what neither of them could know at that moment, was that the day's events would fundamentally change their relationship and challenge Sam's understanding of command, experience, and the sometimes invisible line between confidence and arrogance. Within hours, both the young officer and the old mechanic would find themselves in circumstances neither had anticipated, where lives would hang in the balance and reputations would be irrevocably altered. The seeds of crisis had already been planted, germinating silently beneath the surface of routine operations, waiting for the precise moment to emerge and test everyone involved in ways they couldn't imagine as the morning sun climbed higher over Kingsley Field. The day's training flights proceeded without incident through the late morning. Sam monitored the exercises from the control tower, providing guidance and evaluation as her students executed the planned maneuvers in the designated training airspace 30 miles east of the base. By all appearances, Eagle 3 was performing flawlessly, with Lieutenant Parker demonstrating solid control through a series of high-G turns and simulated engagements. Eagle 3, execute a max performance climb followed by a descending spiral to Angels 15, Sam directed through her headset, using the standard terminology for altitude in thousands of feet. "Roger that, Kingfisher," Parker responded, using Sam's call sign. The F-15 rolled inverted, then pulled through to establish a near-vertical climb, its powerful engines propelling it upward with impressive acceleration. "Good energy management on the climb, Lieutenant Parker," Sam commented as she watched the fighter's trajectory on the tactical display. "Now maintain your roll rate consistency through the spiral." As the morning exercises concluded, the students returned to base, landing in sequence with textbook approaches. Sam met them in the debriefing room, where they spent an hour reviewing video footage of their maneuvers and discussing areas for improvement. Parker in particular had performed well, his handling of Eagle 3 showing growing confidence in the aircraft's capabilities. "Your situational awareness has improved significantly, Lieutenant," Sam noted as they reviewed his performance. "You're starting to think three-dimensionally throughout the engagement envelope." "Thank you, ma'am," Parker replied, his expression reflecting the mix of exhaustion and satisfaction that came from a challenging but successful training flight. After the debriefing concluded, Sam headed to the maintenance hangar to prepare for her own administrative flight scheduled for the afternoon. As she approached, she spotted Collins and two younger technicians working on Eagle 7, which had developed an issue with its environmental control system during the morning sortie. "Afternoon, Sergeant Collins," she greeted him, making an effort to maintain professional courtesy despite their earlier disagreement. Collins straightened from his work. "Lieutenant Mitchell," he acknowledged, "your students put the birds through their paces this morning." "They're making good progress," Sam agreed. "Including Lieutenant Parker in Eagle 3, the aircraft performed perfectly, no sign of those hydraulic fluctuations you were concerned about." Collins wiped his hands on a rag, his expression unreadable. "That's good to hear, ma'am. Sometimes these old birds just like to keep us guessing." Something in his tone made Sam pause. Despite his words, Collins didn't seem entirely convinced. "Is there something else I should know about Eagle 3, Sergeant?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "Nothing documented, Lieutenant, and that's what matters, isn't it?" The subtle challenge in his question wasn't lost on Sam, but she chose not to engage further. "I have a flight at 1400. Is my aircraft ready?" "Eagle 1 is prepped and waiting, ma'am. Full tanks, systems checked, and everything documented." There was just enough emphasis on the last word to make his point. Sam nodded and continued toward the ready room to prepare for her flight. As she walked away, she couldn't shake a growing discomfort with how she had handled the situation. Collins was clearly still concerned about Eagle 3, despite the successful morning flight. Was his persistence based on something genuine, or just an old mechanic's excess caution? Her administrative flight went smoothly, a routine hour-long sortie to maintain her required flight hours and proficiency. Upon landing, she was informed that the afternoon training flights had been adjusted due to an incoming weather front, with Lieutenant Parker scheduled for a solo proficiency flight in Eagle 3 while the other students would work in the simulator. After completing her post-flight checks, Sam headed to the Squadron Operations Center to update her records. She was reviewing flight logs when Captain James Reynolds, the maintenance officer who had signed off on Eagle 3, entered the room. "Afternoon, Lieutenant Mitchell," he greeted her. "Heard your students did well this morning." "They're coming along," Sam agreed. "Parker in particular is showing real progress." Reynolds nodded. "Good to hear. By the way, did Sergeant Collins bend your ear about Eagle 3 this morning? He's been pestering my staff about supposed hydraulic issues that don't show up in any diagnostics." The dismissive tone in Reynolds' voice surprised Sam. "He mentioned some concerns, yes, but as you said, nothing showed up in the documentation." "Collins is a good mechanic, but he's old school," Reynolds said with a slight shrug. "Sometimes I think he forgets we have computerized diagnostics now instead of just listening to engine noises and checking gauges by hand." Sam found herself in the unexpected position of feeling defensive on Collins' behalf. "He has been working on these aircraft since they were first deployed," she pointed out. "That kind of experience counts for something." "Of course it does," Reynolds agreed readily. "But at some point, you have to trust the instruments over instincts. That's what separates modern aviation maintenance from the old days of mechanical hunches and gut feelings." The conversation was interrupted by the operations officer announcing that Lieutenant Parker was preparing for his afternoon sortie. Sam excused herself to observe the flight from the tower, still mulling over the dismissive attitude toward Collins' concerns. Despite her own initial reaction that morning, she was beginning to wonder if she and Reynolds were being too quick to discount the veteran mechanic's intuition. From the control tower, Sam watched as Parker taxied Eagle 3 toward the runway. The afternoon sky had darkened with the approaching weather front, though conditions were still well within parameters for safe flight operations. As the F-15 lined up for takeoff, everything appeared normal. "Eagle 3, you are cleared for takeoff," the tower controller announced. "Winds 240 at 8 knots. "Roger Tower, Eagle 3 rolling," Parker responded. The fighter accelerated down the runway, its powerful engines propelling it forward with impressive force. Just as it reached rotation speed, Sam noticed something unusual, a brief vapor trail from the left side of the aircraft that shouldn't have been there. Before she could process what she was seeing, Eagle 3 lifted off, climbing at a steeper angle than normal for a standard departure. Something was wrong. Eagle 3, check your hydraulic pressure, Sam called urgently over the radio. Parker's voice came back, tension evident even through the radio distortion. Kingfisher, I'm showing fluctuating pressure in System 1. Flight controls are responding sluggishly. Sam felt a cold knot form in her stomach. Collins had been right. Eagle 3, level off at 5,000 feet and run the emergency checklist for hydraulic system failure, she directed, maintaining a calm voice despite her rising concern. I'm coming up to join you. Tower, have Eagle 1 prepped immediately. As she rushed from the control tower toward the flight line, Sam's mind raced through the implications. The F-15 had redundant hydraulic systems, but a failure in System 1 would compromise certain flight controls. Parker was an inexperienced pilot in a potentially deteriorating situation. Within minutes, she was airborne in Eagle 1, climbing rapidly to intercept Parker's aircraft. Through her headset, she could hear him working through the emergency procedures with the tower's guidance. Eagle 3, visual on your position, Sam reported as she maneuvered alongside Parker's aircraft. From her vantage point, she could now see a distinct hydraulic fluid leak trailing from the left side of his F-15. You've got a visible leak from your left wing root area. Understood, Kingfisher, Parker responded, his voice admirably steady given the circumstances. System 1 pressure continues to drop, System 2 holding stable for now. Good, maintain current altitude and reduce speed to conserve hydraulic fluid, Sam instructed. We need to get you back on the ground as quickly as safety allows. As they began a wide, gentle turn back toward the base, Sam noticed Parker struggling slightly with the aircraft's handling. The F-15 was responding sluggishly to control inputs, requiring more force and anticipation to maintain stable flight. Tower, this is Kingfisher with Eagle 3, declaring an emergency. Hydraulic System 1 is failing with visible fluid loss. Request priority landing and emergency response team standing by. Roger, Kingfisher, runway 14 cleared for emergency landing. Winds 250 at 10 knots, gusting to 15. Emergency response standing by. The increasing winds from the approaching weather system would complicate the landing, especially with compromised flight controls. Sam stayed close to Parker's wing, guiding him through each step of the approach. You're doing fine, Lieutenant, she reassured him. Keep your approach shallow, maintain extra airspeed for control authority, and be prepared for sluggish elevator response on flare. Parker acknowledged her instructions, his training kicking in despite the high-stress situation. As they descended toward the runway, Sam could see the emergency vehicles positioned along the taxiway, their lights flashing in the darkening afternoon. Just as Eagle 3 crossed the runway threshold, a strong gust of wind caught the aircraft from the right. The F-15 rolled slightly, and Parker overcorrected, causing a wobble in the approach that would be challenging to recover from even with fully functional hydraulics. Sam held her breath, watching as her student fought to stabilize the aircraft. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed the fighter might veer off the runway, but Parker managed to get the wings level just before touchdown. The landing was harder than ideal, but the F-15 stayed on the runway, decelerating with occasional jerky movements as Parker worked the compromised controls. Finally, the aircraft came to a stop, immediately surrounded by emergency vehicles. Only when she was certain Parker was safe did Sam begin her own landing approach. As she guided Eagle 1 back to Earth, she couldn't help reflecting on how differently the day might have ended if Collins' concerns had been taken seriously from the start. After completing her landing and shutdown procedures, Sam hurried to the debriefing room where Parker was already being interviewed by safety officers. His face was pale but composed, the adrenaline of the emergency landing still evident in his slightly elevated speech pattern. Lieutenant Mitchell, the lead safety officer acknowledged as she entered. We were just discussing the hydraulic failure with Lieutenant Parker. Sam nodded, then turned to her student. You handled that well, Lieutenant. Textbook emergency response. Thank you, ma'am, Parker replied, a hint of lingering tension in his voice, though I'd prefer not to repeat the experience. As the debriefing continued, maintenance personnel brought in preliminary findings from their inspection of Eagle 3. Captain Reynolds entered with the report, his earlier confidence noticeably diminished. Initial assessment confirms failure of a hydraulic line near the left wing root, he reported. The failure point shows evidence of fatigue that wouldn't have been visible during standard inspections. Sam met his eyes directly, but might have been detectable through pressure fluctuations during ground tests. Reynolds had the grace to look uncomfortable. Possibly, we're still investigating. The safety officer made some notes before addressing Sam. Lieutenant Mitchell, as the instructor pilot responsible for today's flights, did you have any indication of potential issues with the aircraft? The question hung in the air, forcing Sam to confront her earlier dismissal of Collins' warning. Her career training emphasized taking responsibility rather than deflecting blame, even when doing so might have personal consequences. Yes, sir, she answered firmly. Master Sergeant Collins reported concerns about intermittent hydraulic pressure fluctuations this morning. The aircraft had passed all standard diagnostics and was signed off as flight-ready, but Sergeant Collins believed there might be an underlying issue the tests weren't catching. And what was your response to this information? The safety officer asked, his tone neutral. I chose to proceed with the scheduled flights based on the official maintenance documentation rather than unverified concerns, Sam admitted, the words tasting bitter as she spoke them. The room fell silent as the implications settled. Sam knew her decision would be scrutinized in the formal investigation to follow. More immediately, she knew she owed Collins an acknowledgement that he had been right, and that her dismissal of his concerns had nearly led to disaster. As the debriefing concluded, Sam found herself facing a reckoning not just with the day's events, but with her own approach to command and the true meaning of responsibility. The incident had exposed blind spots in her thinking that no amount of academic excellence or technical proficiency had prepared her for. Outside the building, the approaching storm had arrived, rain beginning to fall as darkness descended on Kingsley Field. Somewhere on the base, an old mechanic had been proven right in the worst possible way, and a young officer now faced the humbling task of acknowledging that expertise doesn't always come with rank or formal documentation. The lessons of the day were just beginning to unfold, and their impact would extend far beyond a single hydraulic failure or emergency landing. For Sam Mitchell, this was the moment when theory would give way to wisdom, and when the true meaning of leadership would reveal itself in the aftermath of nearly tragic error. The morning after the incident dawned gray and wet, the storm having settled over the region overnight. Sam had slept poorly, her mind replaying the emergency landing and the decisions that had led to it. By 600, she was already at her desk in the squadron building, preparing her official statement for the safety investigation that would formally begin that day. A knock at her office door interrupted her concentration. Looking up, she was surprised to see Major Harrison. "Sir," she said, starting to rise. "As you were, Lieutenant," he replied, closing the door behind him. "I wanted to check in before the investigation briefing at 800. Sam gestured to her computer screen. "I'm just finishing my statement now, sir." Harrison nodded, taking a seat across from her desk. "I've reviewed the preliminary reports. Situation could have been much worse." "Yes, sir. Lieutenant Parker handled the emergency well." "He did," Harrison agreed. "Now, before we go any further, I need to know your honest assessment of what happened yesterday, not the carefully worded statement you're preparing for the record, your actual thoughts." Sam met his gaze, recognizing that this conversation would shape how her commander viewed her judgment going forward. "I made a serious error, sir. Sergeant Collins raised valid concerns about Eagle 3, and I dismissed them because they weren't reflected in the official documentation. I prioritized keeping to the training schedule over investigating a potential safety issue." "And why did you make that decision?" Harrison pressed, his tone not accusatory but genuinely inquiring. Sam considered the question carefully. Partly efficiency, delays cascade through the training schedule, partly because Captain Reynolds had signed off on the aircraft, and partly, she hesitated, then admitted, partly because I assumed Collins was being overly cautious due to his old-school approach. Harrison leaned back in his chair. "Do you know how Collins spotted those hydraulic fluctuations?" "No, sir." "During post-flight checks, he noticed a drop of fluid under the aircraft, tiny, barely visible. Most people would have assumed it was residual fluid from a normal service procedure. But Collins got underneath with a flashlight, traced potential sources, and then monitored pressure gauges during ground testing. He saw microfluctuations that didn't trigger the warning thresholds in our diagnostics, but indicated a developing problem. Sam felt a deepening respect for the mechanic's thoroughness. That level of attention to detail isn't in any maintenance manual. No, it isn't, Harrison agreed. It comes from 40 years of hands-on experience with these aircraft. Collins started working on the F-15 when it was first deployed in the 1970s. He's seen every kind of failure these planes can experience. The implications of what Harrison was saying sank in. Collins hadn't been operating on vague hunches or outdated methods. He had been applying a depth of specific knowledge that no diagnostic computer could match. I should have listened to him, Sam acknowledged. At minimum, I should have asked more questions about his concerns rather than dismissing them. Harrison nodded. That's the conclusion I hoped you'd reach. He stood, preparing to leave. The investigation will run its course, Lieutenant, but how you respond to this incident will say more about your potential as an officer than the mistake itself. After Harrison departed, Sam returned to her statement, revising it to explicitly acknowledge her error in judgment rather than couching it in bureaucratic language. By the time she arrived at the investigation briefing, she had resolved to take full responsibility for her decisions. The briefing room was already filled with key personnel when Sam entered: safety officers, maintenance chiefs, squadron leadership, and representatives from higher headquarters who had arrived overnight. In the back row sat Master Sergeant Collins, his weathered face impassive. Colonel William James, the wing commander, called the meeting to order. We're here to begin the formal investigation into yesterday's in-flight emergency involving Eagle 3. This process will be thorough, factual, and focused on preventing similar incidents in the future rather than assigning blame. Despite the colonel's words, Sam knew that accountability would inevitably be part of the investigation's outcomes. As the responsible officer who had dismissed Collins' concerns, her decisions would be scrutinized closely. The briefing proceeded methodically, with maintenance personnel presenting their preliminary findings about the hydraulic line failure. The technical details confirmed what Collins had suspected. A hairline stress fracture had been developing in a critical hydraulic line, causing minor pressure fluctuations that gradually worsened until catastrophic failure occurred during Parker's afternoon flight. When Captain Reynolds presented the maintenance documentation, his discomfort was evident. Standard diagnostics did not detect the developing failure. The pressure fluctuations reported by Sergeant Collins were below the threshold for automated warnings in our system. Colonel James turned his attention to Collins. Sergeant, would you explain how you identified the potential issue? Collins straightened in his seat. Yes, sir. During post-flight inspection, I noticed a very small fluid spot under the left wing root area. Following the fluid trail, I identified the general area of a possible leak, though I couldn't visually confirm the exact source due to its location within the wing structure. During ground testing, I monitored pressure gauges manually and noted microfluctuations during certain control surface movements. And these fluctuations wouldn't trigger our diagnostic warnings? The colonel asked. No, sir. They were within the acceptable range individually, but I noticed a pattern in the timing that suggested a developing rather than stable issue. The colonel nodded, then turned to Sam. Lieutenant Mitchell, Sergeant Collins reported these concerns to you yesterday morning. Can you walk us through your decision process regarding the aircraft's flight status? All eyes in the room turned to Sam. This was the moment that would define how her handling of the incident would be perceived. She rose from her seat, maintaining proper military bearing despite her inner tension. Sir, Sergeant Collins approached me before the morning sorties to express his concerns about Eagle 3. He explained the pressure fluctuations he had observed, but noted they weren't showing up in standard diagnostics. I verified that Captain Reynolds had signed off the aircraft as flight-ready. She paused, then continued with unflinching honesty. Rather than investigating further or consulting with additional maintenance personnel, I made the decision to proceed with the scheduled flights. I prioritized maintaining our training timeline over addressing a potential safety concern that wasn't documented in our official systems. In retrospect, this was a serious error in judgment that could have resulted in the loss of an aircraft, and more importantly, the life of Lieutenant Parker. A heavy silence filled the room. Sam remained standing, accepting the weight of her admission. Colonel James studied her for a moment. What would you do differently if presented with a similar situation in the future, Lieutenant? I would take any safety concern raised by experienced maintenance personnel seriously, regardless of whether it was captured in official diagnostics, Sam replied without hesitation. I would delay flights if necessary to thoroughly investigate, recognizing that our automated systems have limitations and that human expertise remains an essential component of our safety protocols. The colonel nodded slowly. Thank you for your candor, Lieutenant Mitchell. Please be seated. The investigation briefing continued for another hour, establishing the timeline for formal interviews and technical analysis. Throughout the proceedings, Sam was acutely aware of Collins sitting quietly in the back of the room, his decades of experience finally receiving the recognition it deserved, though under circumstances no one would have wished for. As the meeting concluded, personnel began filing out of the briefing room. Sam deliberately waited, wanting a chance to speak with Collins privately. When most others had left, she approached him. Sergeant Collins, do you have a moment? He looked up, his expression guarded. Yes, Lieutenant. I wanted to apologize directly to you, Sam said, meeting his eyes. You were right about Eagle 3, and I was wrong to dismiss your concerns. If I had listened to you, we could have avoided putting Lieutenant Parker at risk. Collins studied her for a moment, seeming to measure the sincerity of her words. Apology accepted, Lieutenant, though I take no satisfaction in being proven right under these circumstances. I understand, Sam nodded. I've learned an important lesson about the limitations of our technical systems and the value of experience that can't be quantified in manuals or diagnostics. A hint of approval crossed Collins' face. Some things you just know after working with these birds for decades. The planes talk to you if you know how to listen. I'd like to learn more about what to listen for, Sam said, surprising herself with the realization that she genuinely meant it. If you're willing to teach me. Collins raised an eyebrow, clearly not having expected this request from the young officer. I'm always willing to share what I know with those who want to learn, Lieutenant, though my methods aren't always by the book. Sometimes the book doesn't contain everything we need to know, Sam acknowledged. Yesterday made that abundantly clear. Their conversation was interrupted by an announcement over the base intercom. Lieutenant Mitchell, report to Colonel James' office immediately. Collins gave her a sympathetic look. Duty calls, Lieutenant. Good luck. As Sam made her way to the wing commander's office, she braced herself for what would likely be a difficult conversation. A squadron commander might offer mentorship and guidance after a mistake, but being summoned by the wing commander suggested more serious consequences were forthcoming. Colonel James was reviewing documents when she entered his office, and he motioned for her to take a seat without immediately looking up. After a moment, he set the papers aside and fixed her with a direct gaze. Lieutenant Mitchell, I've been reviewing your record since arriving last night. Academy graduate distinguished in pilot training, combat experience, impressive credentials. Thank you, sir, Sam replied cautiously, unsure where this was heading. Credentials, however, are no substitute for judgment, he continued. Yesterday's incident revealed a significant lapse in that area. Sam straightened in her chair. Yes, sir, I take full responsibility for my decision. As you should, the colonel nodded. That said, I was impressed with your candor during this morning's briefing. Many officers in your position would have tried to minimize their role or deflect responsibility onto procedures or others. He leaned forward, his expression serious but not unkind. You're being temporarily removed from instructor pilot status pending the completion of the formal investigation. This isn't punitive but procedural. We need to ensure proper protocols are followed. I understand, sir. Additionally, he continued, I'm assigning you to work with our maintenance squadron for the next 30 days. You'll shadow Master Sergeant Collins and other senior technicians, learning the maintenance side of our operations firsthand. Sam blinked in surprise. This wasn't a standard response to an incident like yesterday's. Sir. The best way to ensure this mistake isn't repeated is for you to develop a deeper understanding of aircraft maintenance beyond what's taught in technical manuals, Colonel James explained. Collins has forgotten more about these aircraft than most of us will ever know. Consider this an educational opportunity rather than a punishment. The assignment was unexpected, but actually aligned with Sam's own expressed interest in learning from Collins. Yes, sir, I appreciate the opportunity. As she left the colonel's office, Sam found herself in an unexpected position, relieved to have avoided more severe consequences, but also genuinely looking forward to the assignment with the maintenance squadron. Yesterday's near disaster had shaken her confidence, but it had also created an opening for a different kind of growth than she had anticipated when coming to Kingsley Field. The rain had lightened to a gentle drizzle as Sam crossed the base to the maintenance hangar where she would begin her temporary assignment. Inside, she found Collins leading a team working on Eagle 3, the aircraft now partially disassembled, as they conducted a thorough inspection of its hydraulic systems. Collins looked up as she approached, surprise evident on his face. "Lieutenant Mitchell, didn't expect to see you here today. Colonel James has assigned me to the maintenance squadron for the next 30 days, Sam explained, specifically to learn from you and your team." The old mechanic's eyebrows rose slightly. "Is that so? Well, we can always use another pair of hands, though I suspect yours are more accustomed to flight controls than wrenches." "I'm here to learn, Sergeant," Sam replied earnestly. "Yesterday made it clear that there are crucial aspects of these aircraft I don't fully understand yet." Collins studied her for a moment, then nodded toward a nearby toolbox. "Grab those 3/8 sockets and we'll get started. First lesson, knowing how systems are put together helps you understand how they fall apart." As Sam joined the maintenance crew, she realized this assignment might prove more valuable to her development as an officer than any formal leadership course. The lessons of the previous day were still raw, but they had created an opening for growth she hadn't anticipated, one that would bridge the gap between the young officer she was and the leader she aspired to become. 3 weeks into her assignment with the maintenance squadron, Sam found herself lying on her back beneath an F-15, helping Collins replace a component in the aircraft's complex environmental control system. Her flight suit was stained with hydraulic fluid and grease, her hands covered in the grime that came with hands-on maintenance work. It was a far cry from the pristine appearance expected of an instructor pilot, but she had stopped caring about such distinctions days ago. "Hand me the torque wrench," Collins directed from beside her, his voice echoing slightly in the confined space beneath the fighter. Sam passed the tool, watching carefully as Collins applied precisely calibrated pressure to secure the component. 45 inch-pounds, right. "Good memory," he nodded approvingly. "Too loose, it works itself free during flight. Too tight, you stress the mounting bracket and create a potential failure point." Over the past weeks, such lessons had become routine, Collins sharing not just the how of aircraft maintenance, but the why behind each procedure. Sam had absorbed this practical knowledge with growing appreciation for the complexity of the machines she had been flying for years without fully understanding their inner workings. "Final connection here," Collins said, making a minute adjustment. "Now feel this fitting. There should be no play, but it shouldn't bind either." Sam reached in, testing the component with her fingers. "Feels solid." "Good, let's close her up." As they emerged from beneath the aircraft, Sam noticed Lieutenant Parker entering the hangar. Since the incident, he had completed several successful flights in other aircraft, showing remarkable resilience after his emergency landing experience. "Lieutenant Mitchell," he greeted her, seemingly unfazed by her grease-stained appearance. "Sergeant Collins, how's Eagle 3 coming along?" "She'll be ready for flight tests tomorrow," Collins replied. "Complete hydraulic system overhaul and preventative replacement of several components that showed early wear signs." Parker nodded, then turned to Sam. "Major Harrison asked me to find you, ma'am. He'd like to see you in his office when you have a moment." After cleaning up as best she could, Sam reported to the squadron commander's office, curious about the summons. Harrison was reviewing flight schedules when she entered. "Lieutenant Mitchell," he acknowledged, gesturing for her to take a seat. "How's the maintenance assignment going?" "Very educational, sir," Sam replied honestly. "Sergeant Collins is an exceptional teacher." Harrison nodded. "That's the feedback I've been getting from the maintenance chief as well. Says you've shown more aptitude and interest than any pilot they've had assigned to them." "It's been eye-opening, sir. I thought I understood these aircraft, but there's so much I never fully appreciated about their mechanical complexity and the expertise required to maintain them." "That's precisely why Colonel James made the assignment," Harrison explained. "Too often, there's a disconnect between those who fly the aircraft and those who maintain them. Both groups are essential, but they don't always understand or appreciate each other's roles." Sam thought about how she had dismissed Collins' concerns that fateful day. "I've certainly gained a new appreciation for what the maintenance crews contribute, sir." "Good," Harrison leaned forward. "The formal investigation has concluded, Lieutenant. The final report cites the primary cause of the incident as the undetected hydraulic line failure, with contributing factors including limitations in our diagnostic systems and decision-making errors in response to reported concerns." Sam nodded, accepting the assessment. "That's accurate, sir. Colonel James has reviewed the report and your performance during your maintenance assignment. He's authorized your return to instructor pilot status effective next Monday." The news came as a surprise. Sam had expected her removal from instructor duties to last at least through the 30 days originally specified. "Thank you, sir. I appreciate the confidence." "Don't thank me," Harrison replied. "Thank Sergeant Collins. His input was a significant factor in the colonel's decision." This was even more surprising. Collins advocated for my reinstatement. He said, and I quote, "Lieutenant Mitchell has learned more about these aircraft in 3 weeks than most pilots learn in their entire careers. She'll be a better instructor for it." Harrison smiled slightly. Coming from Collins, that's high praise indeed. Sam felt a surge of gratitude toward the veteran mechanic. "I'll thank him directly, sir." "There's more," Harrison continued. "The incident has highlighted a systemic issue in how we integrate maintenance concerns into our operational decision-making. Colonel James is implementing a new protocol for the wing, and he wants you to help develop it." "Me, sir." "You've experienced both sides of the equation now, the pressure to maintain training schedules as an instructor and the maintenance perspective that sometimes gets overlooked. You're in a unique position to help bridge that gap." The assignment represented an unexpected opportunity arising from what had initially seemed like a career setback. "I'd be honored to contribute, sir." "Good, you'll continue your regular instructor duties while working on this project. I expect you've gained some valuable perspective to share with your students as well." "Absolutely, sir, starting with a much deeper appreciation for our maintenance personnel." After leaving Harrison's office, Sam sought out Collins, finding him in the maintenance chief's office reviewing documentation for the next day's flight test of Eagle 3. "Got a minute, Sergeant?" she asked from the doorway. Collins looked up. "Of course, Lieutenant, come in." The maintenance chief excused himself, leaving them alone in the small office cluttered with technical manuals and aircraft schematics. "Major Harrison just informed me that I'm being reinstated as an instructor pilot," Sam began. "He also mentioned that your input was instrumental in that decision." Collins shrugged slightly, uncomfortable with the acknowledgement. "Just gave my honest assessment, Lieutenant. You've put in the work these past weeks. Nevertheless, I appreciate your support, especially given how our professional relationship began." Sam paused, choosing her next words carefully. "I've learned more from you in 3 weeks than in years of formal training about these aircraft. That knowledge will make me a better pilot and instructor." "That was the idea," Collins nodded. "Pilots who understand what's happening beneath the skin of their aircraft make better decisions in the air." "Colonel James is implementing a new protocol for integrating maintenance concerns into operational decisions," Sam continued. "He's asked me to help develop it. I'd value your input on what that should look like from the maintenance perspective." For the first time since they'd met, Collins smiled genuinely. "About time someone addressed that gap. I've seen too many concerns dismissed over the years because they didn't fit neatly into the official documentation." "That's exactly what we need to fix," Sam agreed. "The system shouldn't require a near disaster to validate the expertise of people like you." They spent the next hour discussing potential approaches, with Collins sharing insights from decades of experience and Sam contributing her understanding of operational pressures and decision-making processes. The conversation flowed more easily than either would have imagined possible a month earlier. Their formerly adversarial relationship transformed into a collaborative partnership. The following morning brought clear skies and calm winds, perfect conditions for Eagle 3's post-maintenance flight test. By tradition, the maintenance chief had authority to select the pilot for such tests. To Sam's surprise, she was designated as the test pilot. "Sergeant Collins specifically requested you," the maintenance chief explained as Sam reviewed the test flight parameters. "Said you'd know exactly what to look for given your time under the aircraft." The responsibility was significant. Test flights after major maintenance were critical safety evaluations requiring meticulous attention to aircraft performance. Sam approached the pre-flight inspection with a thoroughness that reflected her recent education, checking systems and components with a new understanding of their interconnections and potential failure points. Collins joined her during the exterior inspection, both of them examining the aircraft with professional scrutiny. "Remember to pay special attention to the hydraulic pressure during high-G maneuvers," he advised. "That'll be the true test of our repairs." "I'll run her through the full performance envelope," Sam assured him. "Any anomalies, no matter how small, I'll document thoroughly." Collins nodded, then extended his hand. "Good hunting, Lieutenant." Sam shook his hand, recognizing the gesture for what it was, not just professional courtesy, but an acknowledgement of the trust that had developed between them. "I'll bring her back in perfect condition, Sergeant." The flight itself was transformative. As Sam put Eagle 3 through its paces, she found herself more attuned to the aircraft's responses and subtle feedback than ever before. Her weeks in maintenance had given her an intimate understanding of the machine's inner workings, allowing her to sense its performance on an almost intuitive level. The hydraulic systems performed flawlessly throughout the test regimen, even during the most demanding maneuvers. Sam completed each required evaluation, then added several additional tests based on her knowledge of the specific components that had been replaced, providing the maintenance team with comprehensive performance data. After landing and completing shutdown procedures, she found Collins and his team waiting on the flight line, eager for her assessment. "Hydraulic pressure rock solid throughout the envelope," she reported. "No fluctuations, even under sustained high-G loading. Environmental control system maintaining perfect temperature regulation. She's ready to return to the training schedule." The maintenance team's satisfaction was evident, their work validated by a successful test flight. Collins gave a single approving nod, his expression reflecting professional pride rather than the need for verbal acknowledgement. As the team dispersed to complete the necessary documentation, Collins remained behind. "Different perspective up there now, isn't it?" he asked. Sam considered the question. "Completely different," she agreed. "Before, I was operating the aircraft. Now I feel like I'm partnering with it. I understand what's happening beyond just the controls and displays." "That's what separates a good pilot from a great one," Collins observed. "Anyone can learn to operate an aircraft by the book. Understanding it as a complex integrated system, that's something else entirely." The following Monday, Sam returned to her instructor duties with a fundamentally changed approach. During the morning briefing with her students, she incorporated lessons from her maintenance experience, explaining not just flight procedures but the mechanical realities behind them. "Understanding why a procedure exists is as important as knowing how to execute it," she emphasized. "The limitations in your technical orders aren't arbitrary, they're based on specific mechanical constraints that affect aircraft performance and safety." Lieutenant Parker, now her most attentive student, raised his hand. "Is that something we can learn more about, ma'am? The mechanical side, I mean. After my experience with Eagle 3, I realize how little I understand about what's actually happening inside the aircraft." Sam smiled, recognizing her former self in the question. "As a matter of fact, I've arranged for each of you to spend some time with our maintenance squadron over the coming weeks. Not just observing, but actually working alongside them on basic maintenance procedures." The announcement was met with mixed reactions, some enthusiasm, some uncertainty. Sam understood their hesitation. She had once shared it herself. "Trust me on this," she added. "It will change how you fly these aircraft, and Sergeant Collins has agreed to lead the program personally." In the months that followed, the protocol Sam helped develop was implemented across the wing, creating new pathways for maintenance concerns to be evaluated and addressed regardless of whether they appeared in standard diagnostics. The program became a model eventually adopted by other Air National Guard units, with Collins traveling to several bases to train maintenance chiefs on its implementation. For Sam, the experience transformed not just her understanding of aircraft, but her approach to leadership. She had arrived at Kingsley Field confident in her technical proficiency and academic knowledge, but with blind spots she hadn't recognized. The incident with Eagle 3 had exposed those limitations in the most dramatic way possible, creating an opportunity for growth that no amount of routine training could have provided. On a clear spring morning a year after the incident, Sam stood on the flight line watching as Collins supervised the installation of a new component on Eagle 7. Though eligible for retirement, the veteran mechanic had chosen to continue serving, now in the additional role of training liaison between the maintenance and operations squadrons. "Big day tomorrow," Sam commented as she approached. "First class of students to complete the integrated training program from day one." Collins straightened from his work, satisfaction evident in his expression. "Been a long time coming. Should have been doing this 20 years ago." "Better late than never," Sam smiled. Their training records show significantly improved systems knowledge compared to previous classes. "More importantly, they've developed respect for the maintenance side of operations," Collins noted. "No more us versus them mentality." Sam nodded in agreement. The colonel's pleased with the results, the programs being considered for implementation at the formal training unit at Tyndall. "Good," Collins said simply. "Too important not to share." As they stood together watching aircraft movements across the base, Sam reflected on how completely her relationship with Collins had transformed from their first encounter. What had begun as mutual skepticism had evolved into one of the most valuable professional partnerships of her career. "I was just thinking," she said, "about how differently things might have turned out if I'd listened to you that first day." Collins considered this for a moment. Maybe, or maybe it took that wake-up call to create real change. Systems don't evolve without pressure. "Still, I should have listened." "You're listening now," Collins pointed out. "And more importantly, you made sure others would listen too. That's what leadership looks like, not just avoiding mistakes, but making something better out of the ones that happen." As Sam prepared to return to her squadron duties, Collins called after her. "Lieutenant Mitchell." She turned back. "Yes, Sergeant." "Eagle 3's coming up on scheduled maintenance next week. Thought you might want to assist. Keep your hand in." The invitation represented a continuation of what had become a valuable tradition, Sam regularly joining maintenance sessions to maintain and expand her technical knowledge. "Wouldn't miss it, Sergeant. Just save the dirty jobs for me." Collins chuckled. "Wouldn't have it any other way, ma'am." Walking back across the flight line, Sam reflected on the journey of the past year. What had begun with a young officer ignoring an old mechanic's warning had transformed into a partnership that improved operations across the base and potentially throughout the Air Force training community. The incident with Eagle 3 could have been merely a setback in her career, a black mark to be overcome. Instead, it had become a catalyst for growth and innovation that extended far beyond her individual development. By embracing the lesson rather than simply enduring the consequences, she had helped create something valuable from what could have been merely a cautionary tale. As aircraft thundered overhead, new students practicing the skills that would one day take them into combat, Sam took pride in knowing they were benefiting from the hard lessons she and Collins had transformed into institutional wisdom. The young officer and the old mechanic had each stepped beyond the limitations of their respective roles to create something neither could have accomplished alone, a legacy of improved safety and cooperation that would endure long after their individual service had ended. In that achievement lay the true measure of their success, not the absence of failure, but what they had built from its lessons.